The morning sun had barely risen over Los Angeles when Dr. Maya Collins checked her watch for the third time. She was running late for one of the most important presentations of her career at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. At 32, Maya had already accomplished more than most people do in a lifetime, but today's meeting could determine the future of her Mars rover project. She smoothed down her navy blue blazer and adjusted her neatly pressed collar as she drove her silver Honda Civic through the quiet streets of Pasadena. The traffic was lighter than usual, and Maya allowed herself to relax a little. She might just make it on time after all. The streetlight ahead turned yellow, and Maya carefully drove through it, knowing she had plenty of time to clear the intersection. In her rearview mirror, red and blue lights suddenly started flashing. Maya's heart sank as she checked her speedometer. She hadn't been speeding. Still, she did what her parents had taught her long ago. Turn on the interior lights, keep both hands visible on the steering wheel, and stay calm. The police officer approached her car slowly, his hand resting near his hip. Maya noticed his name tag read Officer Thompson as he leaned down to peer through her window. "License and registration," he said curtly, not bothering with a greeting. "Good morning, officer," Maya responded politely, keeping her movements slow and deliberate as she reached for her documents. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" Officer Thompson's expression remained stern. "You ran that red light back there." "Sir, I'm certain the light was yellow when I entered the intersection," Maya explained calmly, handing over her license and registration. "I'm actually on my way to an important meeting at GPL, and I've been very careful about following traffic rules." The officer barely glanced at her documents before responding. "GPL? The space place?" His tone carried a hint of disbelief that made Maya's stomach tighten. She'd heard that tone before, the one that suggested she couldn't possibly be who she said she was. "Yes, sir, I'm an aerospace engineer there," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite her growing frustration. She reached for her GPL identification badge, but the officer had already started writing the ticket. "Step out of the vehicle, please," Officer Thompson commanded suddenly. Maya's heart began racing, but she complied, slowly stepping out of her car. The morning air felt cool against her face as she stood there in her professional attire, a stark contrast to how she was being treated. "Ma'am, do you know the penalty for running a red light in this county?" Officer Thompson asked, his pen hovering over the ticket book. "Officer, I respectfully disagree with your assessment. The light was yellow when I entered the intersection. I have a dashboard camera that can prove it," Maya said, pointing toward her car. The officer ignored her mention of the camera. "The fine will be $490. You can either pay it or contest it in court within 30 days. He thrust the ticket toward her, along with her license and registration. Maya took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure. She looked at her watch again. She was now definitely going to be late for her presentation. The project she had spent months preparing, the designs she had carefully crafted for the new Mars rover components, would have to wait. "Thank you, officer," she said quietly, accepting the ticket. As she got back into her car, she could see Officer Thompson watching her through her rearview mirror, as if expecting her to do something wrong. Maya sat there for a moment after he drove away, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. She had 3 degrees, including a PhD in aerospace engineering from MIT. She had designed components currently floating in space, yet here she was, being treated like a suspicious character simply because of how she looked. Taking out her phone, Maya called her team at GPL. "Hi, Sarah. Yes, I'm going to be late. There's been an incident. Can you please start the presentation with the overview slides? I'll be there as soon as I can." As she pulled back onto the road, Maya made a decision. She wouldn't just pay this ticket. She had the dash cam footage, she had the truth on her side, and she had faced too many similar situations to let this one slide. She would contest it in court, no matter how much time it took. What she didn't know then was that this traffic stop would lead to an encounter that would change not only her life, but would also impact her entire community. 2 weeks after the traffic incident, Maya Collins stood in line at the county courthouse security checkpoint. She had arrived early, dressed in a charcoal gray pantsuit and low heels, her natural hair neatly styled. In her briefcase, she carried printouts of her dash cam footage, along with her credentials and careful notes about the incident. Next, called the security guard, and Maya stepped forward, placing her briefcase on the conveyor belt. She noticed how the guard's eyes lingered on her a bit longer than the white woman who had gone through before her. Maya was used to these looks. They no longer surprised her, though they still stung. Inside the courtroom, Maya found herself sitting on a hard wooden bench, observing the proceedings before her case would be called. The room smelled of old wood and coffee, and the air conditioning hummed steadily overhead. She watched as Judge William Barrett, a man in his 60s with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses, presided over the morning's cases. As she waited, Maya noticed a pattern. A young Hispanic man trying to explain his situation was cut off mid-sentence. An elderly Asian woman who struggled with English was rushed through her case without proper translation services. A black teenager was given the maximum fine for a minor violation, while a white college student who came before him had received a warning for a similar offense. Maya took out her small notebook and began documenting what she observed. Her scientific training had taught her the value of data, and right now, the data was telling a clear story about Justice Barrett's courtroom. "The next case is Collins versus the state," the court clerk announced, her voice echoing through the high-ceilinged room. Maya stood, smoothing her jacket as she walked to the podium. She could feel Judge Barrett's eyes on her, watching as she arranged her documents. "Ms. Collins," Judge Barrett began, emphasizing the Ms. in a way that made it sound like a criticism. "You're contesting a traffic violation, running a red light. Do you understand the seriousness of this offense?" "Yes, Your Honor," Maya replied clearly. "And it's Dr. Collins. I have evidence that." "Dr. Collins," Judge Barrett interrupted, raising his eyebrows. His tone carried clear disbelief. "And where exactly did you get this title?" The courtroom had grown quiet. Maya could feel all eyes on her, but she stood straight and answered confidently, "I earned my PhD in aerospace engineering from MIT, Your Honor. But more relevant to this case is the dashcam footage I have that shows." "Ms. Dr. Collins," Judge Barrett interrupted again, "are you suggesting that the officer who cited you was incorrect in his assessment?" "Yes, Your Honor, I am. The evidence clearly shows." "I see here that you were argumentative during the stop," Judge Barrett continued, looking at the police report. "And now you're being argumentative in my courtroom." Maya took a deep breath, remembering the breathing exercises her mother had taught her for dealing with difficult situations. "Your Honor, I respectfully disagree. I was professional and courteous during the stop, just as I'm being now. I simply wish to present my evidence." Judge Barrett leaned forward, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. "Young lady, I've been doing this job for 30 years. I can tell when someone has an attitude problem. Given your behavior today, I'm inclined to increase the fine." The injustice of the situation made Maya's chest tight, but her voice remained steady. "Your Honor, on the morning in question, I was on my way to lead a presentation at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, where NASA? Judge Barrett scoffed, not bothering to hide his skepticism. "And what exactly do you do at NASA?" The courtroom had grown so quiet you could hear the air conditioning cycling. Maya reached into her briefcase and pulled out her GPL identification badge and project credentials. "I'm the lead engineer on the upcoming Mars rover project, Your Honor. I design and oversee the development of crucial components that will help us explore Mars. And I can prove both my credentials and my innocence in this traffic violation if you'll allow me to present my evidence." For the first time that morning, Judge Barrett was silent. The look of surprise on his face was one Maya had seen many times before, the look of someone whose prejudices were about to be thoroughly challenged. The silence in the courtroom lasted only a moment before Judge Barrett cleared his throat and shuffled the papers on his bench. His initial shock at Maya's credentials had quickly morphed back into skepticism, but now there was something else in his expression, annoyance at being challenged. "Dr. Collins," he said, putting unusual emphasis on her title, "regardless of your claimed occupation, you're here today because you ran a red light and were confrontational with a police officer. Your job at NASA, if that's indeed where you work, doesn't put you above the law." Maya stood firmly at the podium, her hands resting calmly on its surface. She had prepared for this moment, knowing that her evidence would speak louder than any emotional response. "Your Honor, I completely agree that no one is above the law. That's precisely why I'm here today, to ensure the law is applied fairly and based on facts." Judge Barrett's face reddened slightly. Several people in the gallery leaned forward, sensing the growing tension in the room. The court clerk had stopped shuffling papers, her eyes darting between Maya and the judge. Are you suggesting, Dr. Collins, that Officer Thompson issued this citation unfairly? Judge Barrett's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. I'm not suggesting anything, Your Honor. I'm stating facts, Maya replied, pulling out her dash cam footage printouts. I have frame-by-frame evidence showing that the light was yellow when I entered the intersection. Additionally, I have the original video footage on a USB drive, which clearly shows. That's enough. Judge Barrett slammed his gavel down, making several people in the courtroom jump. Your attitude is becoming increasingly problematic. I'm doubling your fine to $980 for contempt. Maya felt her heart racing but kept her voice steady. Your Honor, with all due respect, I haven't shown any contempt. I'm simply trying to present evidence in my defense, which is my legal right. As a scientist, I believe in data and facts. Would you please review my evidence before making a judgment? The judge leaned forward, his knuckles white as he gripped his desk. Young lady, I've been presiding over traffic cases longer than you've been alive. I don't need a science lesson from someone who claims to work for NASA. Maya pulled out her GPL badge again, along with several official documents. I don't just claim to work for NASA, Your Honor. Here are my credentials, my project documentation, and my security clearance. I'm currently leading a team of engineers developing critical components for the next Mars mission. But more importantly, here is my evidence regarding the traffic stop. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Several spectators were now openly taking notes on their phones. Maya could see the court clerk giving her an encouraging nod. Furthermore, Maya continued, her voice growing stronger, I've observed several concerning patterns in this courtroom today. I've documented how defendants of different backgrounds have received notably different treatment for similar offenses. As someone who deals with data analysis daily, I can tell you that the statistical probability of these disparities being random is. How dare you? Judge Barrett's face was now fully red. This is my courtroom, Dr. Collins, and I will not be lectured about statistics and patterns by someone who thinks their fancy degree gives them the right to disrespect this court. Maya stood her ground, her voice remaining calm but firm. Your Honor, presenting evidence isn't disrespect. Analyzing patterns isn't disrespect. I'm simply exercising my right to a fair hearing. If you'd like, I can share the exact timestamps of today's proceedings where. One more word, Judge Barrett threatened, raising his gavel, and I'll triple your fine. The courtroom had become so quiet you could hear the tick of the wall clock. Maya took a deep breath, reached into her briefcase, and pulled out one final document. It was her latest project summary from GPL, featuring her photo alongside headlines about the Mars mission. As she placed it on the evidence table, a young intern rushed into the courtroom and hurriedly passed a note to the court clerk. The clerk's eyes widened as she read it, and she quickly stood up to approach Judge Barrett's bench. The judge's expression changed as he read the note, his face shifting from anger to something else entirely, a mix of surprise, embarrassment, and dawning realization. What happened next would change the entire dynamic of the courtroom, but not in the way anyone expected. Judge Barrett stared at the note in his hands, then looked back at Maya with new eyes. The court clerk had just informed him that reporters from the local news station were outside the courthouse, drawn by social media posts about a NASA engineer being unfairly treated in his courtroom. But it was more than that. The note also included a printout of Maya's most recent interview with Scientific American magazine. Dr. Collins, he said, his tone noticeably different now. Perhaps we should review your evidence after all. The change in his voice made several people in the gallery exchange knowing looks. Maya nodded professionally and began laying out her materials. She started with the dashcam footage, displaying it frame by frame on the court's projection system. The timestamp clearly showed the light was yellow when she entered the intersection, turning red only after she had already passed through. As you can see, Your Honor, Maya explained, her voice clear and confident. The yellow light lasted exactly 3.7 seconds. According to traffic engineering standards, this timing is actually shorter than the recommended duration for an intersection of this size and speed limit. The judge leaned forward, genuinely interested now. You seem quite knowledgeable about traffic light timing, Dr. Collins. Yes, Your Honor. At MIT, One of my minor projects involved optimizing traffic flow patterns using AI algorithms. While it wasn't my main focus, understanding traffic light timing sequences was crucial for the research. A slight murmur of impressed voices rippled through the courtroom. Judge Barrett removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes, seeming to see Maya clearly for the first time. "Tell me more about your current work at GPL," he said, his earlier hostility completely gone. Maya pulled up an image of her current project on the screen. "I'm leading the development of the next Mars rover's navigation systems. Specifically, we're working on improving the rover's ability to navigate Mars' difficult terrain autonomously." She pointed to several complex diagrams. "These are some of the components my team designed." The judge studied the images with genuine interest. "And you're the lead engineer on this project?" "Yes, Your Honor. I manage a team of 12 engineers, and we're responsible for ensuring the rover can safely traverse the Martian surface while collecting vital scientific data." The courtroom had transformed from a place of tension to one of fascination. Even the bailiff had stepped closer to get a better look at the presentations. "Dr. Collins," Judge Barrett said, removing his glasses and placing them carefully on his desk, "I believe I owe you an apology, not just for today, but for my initial assumptions and treatment of you." Maya stood quietly, maintaining her professional demeanor as the judge continued. "I've been on this bench for 3 decades, and I've prided myself on being fair and impartial, but your presence here today has made me realize something uncomfortable about myself." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I made assumptions about you based on appearance rather than evidence. That's not justice, that's prejudice." The silence in the courtroom was profound. Several people were now openly recording the proceedings on their phones, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. "Your Honor," Maya responded thoughtfully, "I appreciate your candor. In my field, we have a saying: data doesn't lie. When we find our assumptions are wrong, we don't dismiss the data, we revise our hypotheses." Judge Barrett nodded slowly, a small smile forming on his face. "Well said, Dr. Collins. Very well said." He picked up his gavel. "I'm dismissing this case. The evidence clearly shows you did not run a red light, and your dashcam footage proves it." But the judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I'm ordering a review of all traffic citations issued at that intersection over the past 6 months. If the yellow light timing is indeed shorter than standard requirements, there may be other cases that need to be reconsidered." Maya gathered her materials, feeling a mix of vindication and hope. As she prepared to leave the podium, Judge Barrett spoke once more. "Dr. Collins, would you be willing to stay after court today? I'd like to learn more about your work, both at GPL and at MIT. Perhaps your experience with data analysis could help us improve some things here in the courthouse as well." After the courtroom cleared out, Maya found herself sitting across from Judge Barrett in his chambers. The wood-paneled room was lined with law books and framed certificates, but what caught Maya's eye was a small photo of a young woman in a graduation cap and gown. "My daughter," Judge Barrett said, noticing Maya's gaze. "She's studying chemical engineering at Stanford." He paused, a look of realization crossing his face. "You know, when she told me she wanted to go into science, I was so proud. Yet here I am, having doubted your credentials simply because I didn't fit your image of what a NASA engineer looks like," Maya finished gently. The judge nodded, his face showing genuine remorse. "Dr. Collins, I've spent my entire career believing I was administering justice fairly, but your case today, it forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself." Maya opened her laptop, pulling up a spreadsheet she had created during her time in the courtroom. "Your Honor, would you be interested in seeing some data I collected today?" "Please call me William," he said, leaning forward with interest. "And yes, I would." Maya turned the screen towards him, showing a detailed analysis of the morning's cases. "In just 3 hours, I observed a significant pattern in how different defendants were treated. The average fine for minorities was 40% higher than for white defendants with similar violations." Judge Barrett's face grew serious as he studied the numbers. "This is disturbing," he admitted. "But what's more disturbing is that I never noticed it myself." "Sometimes we need an outside perspective," Maya replied. "In engineering, we call it peer review. Every project, no matter how carefully designed, Benefits from fresh eyes. The judge stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the courthouse square below. You know, I've been thinking about what you said in court, about data not lying. It reminds me of why I became a judge in the first place. Justice is supposed to be blind, but somewhere along the way, it's never too late to make changes, Maya encouraged. At GPL, we're constantly adjusting our calculations, refining our models. Even the smallest correction can mean the difference between a successful mission and a failure. Judge Barrett turned back to face her. Dr. Collins, would you be willing to help me set up a system to track and analyze our court's decisions? Something that could help us identify any unconscious biases in our proceedings. Maya's eyes lit up with interest. Actually, I might have some ideas. We use similar analytical tools at GPL to check our design processes for systematic errors. For the next hour, they discussed possibilities. Maya sketched out flowcharts on a legal pad while Judge Barrett took detailed notes. The tension from earlier had completely disappeared, replaced by a shared enthusiasm for solving a complex problem. You know, the judge said, looking at their notes, when my daughter told me she wanted to be an engineer, I told her she could change the world. I never imagined someone else's daughter would help change mine. Maya smiled, remembering her own father's encouragement. My dad said something similar. He always told me that science wasn't just about exploring space, it was about expanding minds. As they wrapped up their impromptu meeting, Judge Barrett walked Maya to the door. Dr. Collins, I want you to know that what happened today will lead to real changes in this courthouse. Sometimes it takes a wake-up call to realize we're not living up to our own ideals. Change starts with awareness, Maya replied. In engineering, we call it calibration, adjusting our instruments to ensure accuracy. Maybe the legal system needs regular calibration too. Before Maya left, Judge Barrett had one more question. Would you be willing to come back? Perhaps speak to our judicial training program about unconscious bias. Your perspective as both a scientist and someone who's experienced these biases firsthand would be invaluable. Maya paused at the door, considering the opportunity. This wasn't what she had expected when she walked into court that morning to fight a traffic ticket, but sometimes, she reflected, the most important discoveries happen by accident. Yes, she said finally, I think that could make a real difference. The next morning, the county courthouse was unusually crowded. Word had spread about what happened in Judge Barrett's courtroom, and now reporters filled the benches, their cameras and notepads ready. Maya sat in the front row, wearing the same professional attire as the day before, but today she wasn't here as a defendant. Judge Barrett had called a special session of the court. The usual morning cases had been delayed by an hour for what he described in his announcement as an important matter of public interest. The room buzzed with whispered conversations and the soft clicking of camera shutters. At exactly 9 a.m., Judge Barrett entered the courtroom. Instead of taking his usual seat at the bench, he stood in front of it, facing the packed gallery. His formal black robes seemed to weigh heavily on his shoulders. Good morning, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. Yesterday, something significant happened in this courtroom. Something that made me realize I had failed in my most basic duty as a judge, the duty to provide equal justice under law. He turned slightly to acknowledge Maya's presence before continuing. Dr. Maya Collins came to this court to contest a traffic citation. She came with evidence, with facts, and with a professional demeanor that I, to my shame, chose to ignore. Instead, I saw what my prejudices wanted me to see. The reporters' pens scratched rapidly across their notepads. In the back of the courtroom, Officer Thompson, who had issued the original ticket, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Dr. Collins is not just any citizen seeking justice. She is a highly accomplished aerospace engineer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. She leads a team designing components for the next Mars rover. But here's the crucial point. None of that should matter. Judge Barrett's voice grew stronger. Every person who enters this courtroom deserves the same respect, the same attention to evidence, and the same fair treatment under the law. Maya watched as several of the regular courthouse staff nodded in agreement. The court clerk who had helped her yesterday dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Yesterday, Dr. Collins did more than prove her innocence. She held up a mirror to this court, and what I saw disturbed me deeply. Judge Barrett pulled out the analysis Maya had shown him. In just one morning session, she documented clear patterns of bias in how different defendants were treated. The data, as she reminded me, doesn't lie. He turned to face Maya directly. Dr. Collins, I'd offer you my sincere and public apology, but an apology without action is just words. Therefore, I am announcing several immediate changes to how this court operates. The room grew even quieter as Judge Barrett outlined his plan. First, we will be implementing a new data tracking system to monitor our court's decisions for potential bias. Second, all court officers, including myself, will undergo additional training on unconscious bias. And third, we are establishing a civilian oversight committee to review our practices and ensure we're living up to our ideals of equal justice. Officer Thompson stood up from his seat, walked to the front of the courtroom, and asked permission to speak. Judge Barrett nodded. Dr. Collins, the officer said, his voice carrying a hint of nervousness, I also owe you an apology. I made assumptions during our encounter that were unfair and unprofessional. Your dashcam footage clearly shows the light was yellow, and I should have reviewed that evidence at the scene. Maya acknowledged both apologies with a graceful nod. She hadn't come to court seeking public recognition or apologies. She had simply wanted justice. But now she saw how this moment could lead to something bigger than herself. Judge Barrett concluded the session with words that would soon be quoted in newspapers across the country. Justice isn't just about following the law, it's about recognizing and correcting our mistakes. Dr. Collins came to this court seeking justice, and in doing so, she helped us see how far we still have to go in achieving it. Let this be a turning point, not just for this court, but for our entire community. As the cameras flashed and reporters began raising their hands with questions, Maya realized that this story was about to reach far beyond the walls of this courthouse. Within days of Judge Barrett's public apology, Maya's story spread like wildfire across social media and news outlets. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing with interview requests, and her email inbox was flooded with messages from people sharing similar experiences. Even her colleagues at GPL were amazed to see their usually private lead engineer becoming a symbol for social change. One morning, as Maya walked through the GPL parking lot, she noticed a group of young black girls standing near the entrance with their teacher. They were from a local middle school STEM program, and their eyes widened with recognition as Maya approached. Are you Dr. Collins? One girl asked excitedly. We saw you on the news. Our teacher showed us your interview about the Mars Rover 2. Maya smiled, remembering her own childhood dreams of working in space exploration. Would you like to see what we're working on? She asked, making a spontaneous decision. The girls' faces lit up with excitement. Later that afternoon, Maya sat in a CNN studio, adjusting her microphone as the interviewer prepared for their live segment. The makeup artist had just finished touching up her face, and the producer was counting down from 10. Today we're joined by Dr. Maya Collins, the interviewer began, whose recent experience in a California courthouse has sparked a national conversation about bias in our justice system. Dr. Collins, you're a NASA engineer who designs Mars rovers. How did you end up becoming a voice for social justice? Maya took a deep breath before responding. I didn't set out to become a voice for anything. I'm a scientist. I believe in data, evidence, and fair evaluation. When I witnessed unfair treatment in that courtroom, I applied the same analytical approach I use in my engineering work. The interview cut to footage of Judge Barrett's public apology, then returned to Maya. Since that day, your story has inspired similar reviews in courthouses across the country. How does that feel? It feels like proof that change is possible, Maya replied. In engineering, we have a saying, every failure is an opportunity to improve the system. What happened in that courtroom was a failure of justice, but it's becoming an opportunity for improvement. Back at GPL, Maya's team had decorated her office with newspaper clippings and supportive messages. Her project manager stopped by with an unexpected proposal. The public relations team has been swamped with requests, he said. Schools want you to speak about both engineering and social justice. They think you could inspire a whole new generation of scientists who might not have seen themselves in this field before. Maya looked at the Mars rover prototype visible through her office window. How would that affect our project timeline? We'll adjust, he replied with a smile. Some things are more important than schedules. That evening, Maya received an email that made her pause. It was from Officer Thompson, the policeman who had given her the ticket. He was now using her case as a training example in his department's newly established bias awareness program. He attached a photo of his daughter at a science fair, holding a project about Mars exploration. "Your story inspired her," he wrote. "She says she wants to be an engineer now, too." The media attention brought challenges as well. Some online commenters accused her of seeking publicity. Others questioned her credentials or tried to minimize the significance of what had happened. But for every negative comment, there were dozens of supportive messages from people who saw themselves in her story. A week after the courthouse incident, Maya was invited to speak at a national conference on judicial reform. As she prepared her presentation, she received a text message from Judge Barrett. "Thought you want to know. We've implemented the data tracking system you designed. First week's results are eye-opening. Thank you for helping us do better." Maya sat back in her chair, thinking about how a simple traffic ticket had turned into something so much bigger. Her phone buzzed again, another interview request, this time from a major science magazine wanting to feature her in their Women Changing the World issue. She glanced at the Mars rover prototype again, its mechanical arm reaching upward as if pointing to the stars. Sometimes, she realized, the most important discoveries happen when you're looking for something else entirely. 6 months after the courthouse incident, Maya stood at the podium in the same courtroom where her story began. This time, however, she wasn't there to contest a ticket. She was delivering the keynote speech at the county's first judicial fairness training program. The audience included judges, police officers, and court staff from across the state. Judge Barrett sat in the front row, nodding encouragingly as Maya began her presentation. Next to him sat Officer Thompson, who had become an unexpected ally in police reform efforts. "When I walked into this courtroom 6 months ago," Maya began, "I was just an engineer with a traffic ticket and some data. Today, I stand here as proof that one small moment of truth can create ripples of change across an entire system." She clicked to her first slide, showing the statistical analysis she had developed with Judge Barrett. The numbers told a compelling story. Since implementing their new tracking system, the court had seen a 60% reduction in discriminatory sentencing patterns. "As an engineer, I work with spacecraft that explore Mars," Maya continued, switching to an image of her rover project. "These machines have to constantly adjust their course based on new data. Our justice system isn't so different. When we see something isn't working, we have a responsibility to correct it." In the back of the room, a group of law students furiously took notes. They were part of a new legal clinic focused on identifying and challenging systemic bias in the courts, inspired by Maya's case. After her speech, Judge Barrett approached the podium. 6 months ago, Dr. Collins showed us that justice isn't just about following laws. It's about being willing to examine our own biases and correct them. Today, I'm proud to announce that our court's new procedures have been adopted as a model by the state judicial system. The changes went beyond just the courthouse. The local police department had revised its traffic stop procedures, requiring officers to review dash cam footage before issuing citations. Officer Thompson now led workshops on bias awareness for new recruits, often using his own experience with Maya as a teaching moment. But perhaps the most significant impact was happening outside the justice system. Maya's inbox regularly filled with messages from young women of color pursuing careers in STEM fields. Her story had shown them that they could stand up for themselves while excelling in their chosen fields. At GPL, Maya's team had successfully completed the Mars rover components ahead of schedule, despite her increased public speaking engagements. Her project manager joked that she was now managing 2 missions, one to Mars and one to transform the justice system. After the training session, Maya met with a small group of high school students who had been invited to observe. One girl raised her hand shyly. "Dr. Collins, how do you balance being a NASA engineer with being an activist?" Maya smiled, remembering her own journey. "I don't see them as separate things. Whether I'm designing a rover or helping improve our justice system, I'm using the same skills: analyzing data, identifying problems, and working on solutions." As she packed up her presentation materials, Maya received a text message. It was a photo from Judge Barrett of his daughter, who had just accepted a job at a major engineering firm. "She says you inspired her to stick with it when her professors doubted her," the message read. Later that evening, Maya sat in her office at GPL, looking at the framed ticket that now hung on her wall, a reminder of how unexpected moments can lead to meaningful change. Her computer screen showed the latest images from Mars, while next to it lay preliminary data from the courthouse's newest bias monitoring system. The intercom buzzed. A school group was waiting in the lobby, eager to hear about both her engineering work and her advocacy for justice. Maya gathered her materials, including the small Mars rover model she used for demonstrations. As she walked to meet them, she passed a new poster in the GBL hallway showing a diverse group of young scientists. Below it was a quote she had given in a recent interview: "The universe is vast, but prejudice is small. Science teaches us to explore the unknown, including our own biases." Maya smiled, knowing that somewhere in that group of students might be the next engineer, or judge, or change-maker who would continue the work she had started. Sometimes the greatest discoveries happen right here on Earth.